Maya Fisher booked the cabin at 11 at night, 3 glasses of wine into a breakup that hadn't technically been a breakup, so much as a slow, humiliating discovery that the man she'd been living with for 2 years had never actually left his ex-wife the way he'd promised her. Month after month, that he had. She needed somewhere that wasn't her apartment, still half full of his things because he hadn't come to collect them yet. And somewhere that wasn't anywhere near the friends who'd start looking at her with that particular blend of pity and told you so she couldn't stomach right now. The listing that caught her eye, scrolling through a rental app at midnight with the specific recklessness of someone who needed a decision made quickly before her better judgment caught up with her, was a small log cabin 2 hours outside the city, tucked into the base of a mountain range, no neighbors for miles, described simply as quiet, remote, exactly what you need. The price was absurdly reasonable for a place that isolated. She booked it without reading the reviews, because there weren't any. The drive up took longer than the map promised, the paved road giving way to gravel and then to something barely qualifying as a road at all, winding up through dense pine forest until she reached a modest, well-kept cabin exactly where the app's map pin had promised it would be. Smoke already curling from the chimney, despite the listing's self-check-in instructions suggesting no host would be present. A man was splitting wood in the yard when she pulled in. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in the kind of practical outdoor clothing that suggested he lived this life rather than performed it for guests. He looked up at the sound of her car, set the axe down, and crossed the yard to meet her with an easy, unhurried warmth that felt, after months of careful lies and careful reassurances from a man who'd never once been straightforward with her, almost disorienting in its simplicity. "You must be Maya," he said. "I'm Ethan. I own the place. Figured I'd get the fire going before you arrived, since the forecast's calling for a cold one tonight." The listing said self-check-in, Maya said, unable to fully suppress the reflexive wariness 2 years with a dishonest man had trained into her. "I wasn't expecting anyone to actually be here. I like to meet the people staying here, when I can," Ethan said, an easy shrug in his voice. "Cabin gets lonely otherwise. Come on in, I'll show you around before I head out." He showed her through the cabin with the unhurried familiarity of someone who knew every creak in the floorboards, every cork of the wood stove, and Maya found herself relaxing, despite herself, into the particular ease of his presence. No performance to it, no careful management of what he said to keep her happy, just a straightforward, competent kindness that felt, after 2 years of the opposite, almost like a foreign language she was slowly remembering how to speak. He left before dark, promising to check the woodpile in the morning, and Maya spent her first evening in the cabin doing exactly what she'd come for. Crying, without an audience, drinking tea instead of wine, staring into a fire someone else had built for her, without expecting anything in return. She got lost the next afternoon, hiking a trail behind the cabin that the listing had mentioned, without adequately describing how easily it forked into unmarked branches, and found herself, as the light began to fail, genuinely uncertain which direction led back. She was seriously considering the possibility of a very cold, very stupid night in the woods when she heard footsteps, and Ethan appeared through the trees with the same unhurried calm he'd shown splitting wood the day before, as though he'd simply known, somehow, exactly where to find her. "Trail forks bad about a mile back," he said, falling into step beside her without making her feel foolish for the mistake. "Everyone gets turned around here their first time. I should mark it better." He walked her back to the cabin in the fading light, and Maya found herself, against every instinct 2 years of careful heartbreak should have trained into her, genuinely enjoying his company, the quiet, the lack of performance, the sense that he was exactly who he presented himself to be. Nothing hidden, nothing managed. It was 3 days into her week-long stay, driving into the small town 20 minutes down the mountain to restock groceries, that she mentioned Ethan to the woman ringing up her order at the general store, some casual comment about how kind the cabin's owner had been. The woman's hands stilled on the register. "Ethan Marsh," she said carefully. "The cabin up on Ridgeline Road." "That's the one," Maya said, something in the woman's tone already prickling at the back of her neck. Honey, the woman said, setting down the can of soup she'd been scanning. Ethan Marsh died in an avalanche almost 3 years ago. That cabin's been sitting empty ever since. Nobody's rented it out. His sister owns it now. And far as I know, she's never once put it on any app. Maya stood frozen at the register, the grocery bag half-packed in her hands, certain she'd misheard something, or that the woman was confusing him with someone else, some other Ethan who happened to share the same unusual last name, in a town small enough that such coincidences seem statistically implausible. That doesn't make sense, she said carefully. I met him 2 days ago. He built a fire for me, showed me around the cabin, found me on the trail yesterday when I got lost. He's real. He's not a ghost story. He's a man who owns a cabin. The woman studied her for a long moment, something careful and searching in her expression, the particular look of someone deciding how much of an uncomfortable truth a stranger actually needed to hear. I'm not saying you didn't meet somebody, she said finally. I'm saying the man who owned that cabin, the man whose name is Ethan Marsh, died in an avalanche on the North Ridge Trail 3 winters back. Whole town turned out for the memorial. His sister Claire's had that place sitting empty ever since. Couldn't bring herself to sell it. Couldn't bring herself to rent it either. Not until apparently now, though nobody around here's heard a word about it going back on any market. Maybe it's a different Ethan, Maya said, though even as she said it, she felt the flimsiness of the explanation, the particular unlikeliness of 2 men sharing that name, that cabin, that address in a town this small. Maybe, the woman said in a tone that suggested she didn't believe it any more than Maya did. Or maybe you should talk to Claire. She still lives here in town, works over at the diner most mornings. If there's a rational explanation for who you're staying with, she'd know it faster than I would. Maya drove back up the mountain with her groceries sitting untouched in the passenger seat, her mind cycling through every possible explanation that didn't require accepting what the woman had just told her. A prank, a case of mistaken identity, some kind of elaborate rental scam involving a dead man's name and a cabin nobody was supposed to be occupying. None of the explanations fit cleanly against what she'd actually experienced. A man who knew every detail of that cabin's construction, who moved through its rooms with the ease of genuine ownership, whose warmth and steadiness had felt, over 3 days, entirely, uncomplicatedly real. Ethan wasn't at the cabin when she returned. The fire he'd apparently built that morning burned down to embers. No sign of him anywhere on the property. Maya sat on the porch steps as the afternoon light faded, replaying every interaction, searching for some detail she might have missed. A strangeness in how he moved, a coldness to his skin when he'd steadied her arm on the trail. Anything that might explain what the woman in town had told her, without requiring her to accept something that violated every rational framework she'd ever operated within. She found him at dusk, splitting wood in the same spot she'd first seen him, and she stood at the edge of the yard for a long moment, watching him work with the same easy physical competence she'd noticed from the start, trying to reconcile the solid, breathing reality of him against the impossible thing the town had just told her. "You're back later than I expected," Ethan said, setting the axe down when he noticed her. "Everything all right in town?" Maya's voice, when she finally found it, came out smaller than she intended. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer me. Not deflect, not change the subject. I've had 2 years of a man who did that to me every single time I asked him a real question, and I can't do it again." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, a wariness she hadn't seen from him before, as though he'd been waiting, in some tired, resigned way, for exactly this conversation to eventually arrive. "Ask me," he said quietly. "A woman in town told me Ethan Marsh died in an avalanche 3 years ago. She said this cabin's been empty ever since, that your sister Claire owns it now and has never once rented it out." Maya's hands were shaking, though she couldn't tell anymore whether it was from cold or fear or something else entirely. "So who are you? Because you can't be both things. You can't be a dead man and the person standing in front of me right now." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, looking at her with an expression that carried more sorrow than surprise, as though her question hadn't caught him off guard, so much as confirmed something he'd known. From the very first moment she'd pulled into the driveway, would eventually come. "I think," he said finally, "you'd better sit down. This is going to take longer to explain than I've got daylight left to do it properly." They sat together on the porch steps, the cold seeping through Maya's jacket as the last light drained out of the sky. And Ethan told her the truth, in the same steady, unhurried voice he'd used to show her through the cabin 3 days earlier. As though even this required no performance from him, only honesty. "The avalanche was real," he said. "North Ridge Trail. Almost 3 years ago now, though I've lost some sense of exactly how time passes up here. I was checking a section of trail that had been flagged unstable, after a big snowfall, doing exactly the kind of thing I'd done 100 times before without incident. That day, I wasn't as lucky." Maya sat very still, the rational part of her mind still scrambling for some alternative explanation, even as every instinct told her, with a certainty she couldn't fully articulate, that he was telling her something true. "I don't fully understand it myself," Ethan continued, staring out at the darkening tree line rather than at her. "I don't have some tidy explanation for why I'm still here, still able to split wood and build fires and walk trails I've walked 1,000 times. I only know that when I woke up, so to speak, I was standing right about where you're sitting now, and the cabin was empty, and Claire had already had the memorial, already grieved, already started the slow process of deciding what to do with a place she couldn't bear to sell or rent." "Why didn't you go to her?" Maya asked quietly. If this is really happening, why not let her know you're still here?" "I tried," Ethan said, something raw entering his voice for the first time. "The first year, I tried everything I could think of. She never saw me, never heard me. I could move things sometimes, on the worst nights when I couldn't stand the loneliness of it. A book knocked from a shelf, a door left open that I know I'd closed. She noticed those things, eventually, and decided the cabin was too full of grief to keep visiting, which is exactly the opposite of what I wanted, and exactly the thing I couldn't seem to stop causing." "But you can talk to me," Maya said. "You're solid. You built a fire. You caught my arm on the trail. I felt that, Ethan. That wasn't nothing." "I don't know why you're different," he admitted, turning to look at her directly for the first time since he'd started explaining. "I've had exactly one other guest stay here, back before this listing somehow appeared without my sister's knowledge or consent, which is its own mystery I haven't solved. A hiker who'd gotten lost, stumbled onto the property looking for shelter one winter night. She saw me the same way you do, solid, real. We talked for hours, and then she left the next morning, and I never saw her again, and I've spent every day since wondering if that was some kind of fluke, or if it means something about who's able to see me and who isn't." Maya sat with this for a long moment, the cold forgotten, her rational framework for understanding the world quietly rearranging itself around an impossibility she could no longer explain away. "What do you actually want?" she asked finally. "If this is real, if you're really however this works, what is it you're actually looking for, up here alone, for 3 years?" Ethan was quiet for a long time before he answered, and when he did, his voice carried a weight that told her this was the first time he'd said it aloud, to anyone, in all the years since the avalanche had taken whatever ordinary life he might otherwise have lived. "I think I'm still here," he said slowly, "because there's something I never got to finish. Some conversation, some goodbye, some piece of unfinished business, that's keeping me tied to this mountain, instead of wherever people like me are supposed to go once they're done here. I don't know what it is, specifically. I've had 3 years to think about it, and I still don't know. But I know it's why I keep waking up here, every morning, instead of simply being gone." "And the listing," Maya said, "the one that somehow appeared, that let me book this cabin at midnight without my host apparently knowing anything about it." "I don't have an explanation for that either," Ethan admitted, something almost like hope flickering behind the exhaustion in his expression. "Except that maybe, whatever's keeping me here, decided it was time to bring someone who could actually see me. Someone who might help me figure out what I'm still waiting to finish. Maya looked at him for a long moment. This solid, warm, impossible man, sitting beside her on cabin steps that belonged by every rational account to a dead man's grieving sister. And felt something in her chest settle into a strange, quiet certainty. "Then I guess," she said, "we'd better figure out what it is, because I've got 4 more days on this booking, and I'm not leaving until we do." They spent the following 2 days working through it together, Maya asking careful, patient questions, the way she imagined a good detective might. Ethan answering with the same honest, unhurried openness that had drawn her to him from the very start. They went through the cabin room by room, looking for anything unfinished, anything left undone, the way a life gets left undone when it ends without warning. A half-repaired chair in the back room. A letter started and never finished, tucked into a desk drawer. Addressed to Claire, in handwriting that trailed off mid-sentence. "I remember starting that," Ethan said, staring at the unfinished letter with an expression of dawning, uncomfortable recognition. "The morning before the avalanche. I was going to tell her." He stopped, something catching in his throat that Maya hadn't seen from him before, not even in the raw vulnerability of that first night's confession. "We'd had a fight, stupid, small thing, about whether she should sell this place or keep coming up here with me every summer, the way we always had. I said some things I didn't mean. I was going to apologize, tell her I understood why she was pulling away, tell her the cabin didn't matter half as much to me as she did. I never finished it. Then I was just gone, before I ever got the chance to say any of it to her directly." Maya read the unfinished letter carefully, then looked up at him with the particular clarity of someone who'd finally found the missing piece. "That's it," she said. "That's what's keeping you here. She doesn't know you forgave her, that you never meant those things you said in the fight. She spent 3 years grieving a version of your last conversation that was angry and unresolved, and you've spent 3 years unable to tell her it wasn't what she thinks it was." "I can't talk to her," Ethan said. "I've tried. She can't see me, can't hear me, no matter how hard I've tried to reach her these past 3 years. "But you can talk to me," Maya said, already reaching for a pen, "and I can talk to her. Tell me everything you need her to know, and I'll make sure she hears it, one way or another." They spent that final night finishing what he'd started 3 years earlier. Ethan speaking the words slowly and carefully, while Maya wrote them down in her own handwriting, translating a dead man's unfinished apology into something his sister could actually receive. When they finished, near dawn, Ethan looked lighter than she'd seen him in 3 days of knowing him, something settled and peaceful replacing the quiet exhaustion that had lived behind his eyes since that first conversation on the porch steps. "I don't know what happens now," he admitted, watching the sun rise through the cabin's front window with an expression that mixed hope and uncertainty in equal measure. "Whether finishing this actually changes anything, whether I'll still be here tomorrow, or whether this is it." Maya found Claire at the diner the next morning, exactly where the woman at the general store had said she'd be, and introduced herself carefully, watching the other woman's face for the particular grief that lived behind the eyes of someone who'd lost a brother she'd never properly said goodbye to. She handed over the letter without full explanation, only the careful, true statement that she'd stayed at the cabin, that she'd found it tucked away unfinished, that she thought Claire deserved to read what her brother had never gotten the chance to send. Claire read it standing at the counter, tears falling freely by the second paragraph, and when she finished, she looked up at Maya with an expression of such raw, grateful relief that Maya understood, watching it settle over her, that something real and necessary had just been completed. "He forgave me," Claire said, half to herself, half to Maya, clutching the letter like something precious. "All this time, I thought our last conversation was him being angry with me. I thought that was how he—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence, but Maya understood exactly what she meant. Maya drove back up to the cabin one final time before checking out, uncertain what she'd find. uncertain whether the impossible, gentle man she'd spent 4 days with would still be there to say goodbye to properly. He was waiting on the porch steps, the same spot where he'd first told her the truth, and something in his posture told her, even from a distance, that everything had changed. "I can feel it," he said, when she reached him, something like wonder in his voice. "Whatever's been keeping me here, it's different now. Lighter. I think I'm supposed to go, Maya. I think that letter was the last thing standing in the way." "Then go," Maya said, though her voice caught on the word, surprised by how much this strange, brief, impossible connection had come to matter to her over 4 short days. "Go be wherever you're supposed to be. You don't owe this mountain anything else." He smiled at her, warm and solid and real, one final time, and told her in the last thing he ever said to her, that meeting her had been the unexpected gift folded inside an otherwise unfinished ending. That whatever had brought her to that cabin at midnight, heartbroken and reckless and needing somewhere to simply exist for a week, had also, somehow, given him exactly what he needed to finally let go. Maya drove down the mountain that afternoon with the unfinished week of her booking left behind her, checking out early for reasons she couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't lived through what she just had. She stopped at the diner on her way out of town, found Claire still working behind the counter, and told her simply that she thought her brother had finally found his peace. She never went back to that cabin. She never needed to. But she thought of Ethan often in the months that followed, not with grief exactly, but with a quiet, grateful wonder at the strange, impossible week that had taught her, more than 2 years with a dishonest man ever had, what honesty actually felt like, even from someone who'd only ever had 4 days left to give it.